interesting story just kind of popped on my radar. I don't remember who sent this, so forgive me if I'm not remembering your name, because I'm not remembering your name. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, recently elected governor of California, has just signed an executive order ending the death penalty in California. Now, when you look at some of the numbers on this, it becomes somewhat startling when you see the racial disparities in regards to who supports capital punishment, meaning whites, who don't support it, meaning blacks. If you don't support capital punishment, you can't be on a jury dealing with capital punishment, meaning that the people who are at the receiving end of capital punishment are in large part not on the juries that decide capital punishment. This in and of itself is troubling, but you get further into the stats. Half of the people that are on the death penalty are African Americans. We only make up 13% of the population. Half of the people on death penalty. By the way, as a total, I did this other video based on the crime bill that was put into place by Bill Clinton. Right now, we have 5% of the world's population. That's all we have in America. When we talk about the West, we're talking about a small component of the world, even though we pretend as if, kind of like Rome, that the end of the borders of Rome is the end of the world. It is not. With 5% of the world, we have 25% of the world's prison population in our jails. So think about what that means. The gulags. China is 3 times our population, and yet we still have more people in our prisons. When you're looking at a prison state, what are the requirements that you need in order to get a prison state? And what I will put to you is having a prison population that outpaces the rest of the world in spades. There's something wrong with your laws, there's something wrong with your political system, and there's something wrong with the society itself that creates that level of chaos or that level of crime and criminality. Take a look at the stats on this. This was interesting, and there's not much to this other than what it is. California Governor Gavin Newsom, the recently elected Democratic executive of America's largest state, is ending the death penalty there, granting a reprieve to more than 700 people on death row. Newsom is issuing Wednesday an executive order halting executions. There are 737 inmates currently on death row, according to the Sacramento Bee. Some of them have been there for decades. Our death penalty system has been, by any measure, a failure, Newsom said in announcing his decision. The intentional killing of another person is wrong, and as governor, I will not oversee the execution of any individual. He said executions waste money, didn't make residents safer, and discriminated against people with mental illness or people of color. Newsom has long opposed the death penalty, also citing cases of wrongful convictions of people being put to death to explain his belief. An estimated 4% of the people sentenced to death were innocent, researchers say. The United States has executed more than 1,400 people since the 1970s, but executions have fallen considerably since the 90s, and more states have banned the death penalty over the past decade. Under Newsom's order, California joins 19 other states in prohibiting capital punishment. So right here, polling shows that most of the people back it because they believe in FRI, meaning the reason that people back capital punishment. Because it fits the crime. Those racial disparities have a real effect on the cases too, Lynn reviewed. There's a big gap in support by race. A Pew Research Center study from March 2014 found that white support for the death penalty was 8 percentage points higher than the average for all Americans, which they measured at 55%. And black support was 8% lower. The poll found that the minority of African Americans supported the death penalty. This matters because if you believe the death penalty is never appropriate, you can't be seated on a jury in cases where someone may be sentenced to the death penalty. That's one of the many factors that make it extremely hard for African Americans to get on juries of capital cases, even though African Americans are often the ones on trial. In addition to the implicit bias, arguments about the death penalty's racial skew don't work because people who support the death penalty is largely rooted in a moral demand for punishment, not in the fact about how well it works or what it costs. Meaning, it's not about results. They're not supporting the death penalty because it works. They're not supporting it because it does any particular thing other than make them feel better about something that took place, meaning this kind of moral justice, regardless of the results in the wider world. You know, I often make this case that justice, it's not real. There's no larger contextual being that looks at this and says, okay, this is fair and this is not. There are things that may make you feel morally justified, but the consequences in the larger world, those are real. Meaning, justice is one thing, action and consequence is another. Action and consequence is, for all intents and purposes, real. You do something in the objective world, something happens in the objective world. But this idea of justice, I don't know what that is. That's too ephemeral, even though all of us feel we have somewhat of a sense of it. So understand what I mean by this. I'm not saying that there isn't this thing within us that we feel, you know, something is justified based on something that took place. There's something, it's almost like hardwired in our brains to some degree. You can look at it on a CAT scan. It, you know, lights up. You ask a person or you show something that was an injustice and then you fix it and rectify it, or let something happen to the person that did it, the thing lights up in their brains. It's the reason why movies allow, you know, the bad guy to get shot or the bad people to get injured. Because them being bad people, for the most part, you can be okay with whatever happens to them. It's like killing a Nazi. Just the term itself. It is okay to do this because this person is a Nazi. I hope that makes sense. It doesn't matter whether or not it does anything positive in the larger world. It doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter if it does anything real to stem crime or slow down the prison population. It doesn't matter at all. It feels morally right. And so it is okay that we do it. This is kind of like the recycling argument. It makes me feel good to recycle, even though the changes that are necessary to take place need to take place in a larger global sphere. Newsom noted that more than half of the California death rows of people of color, calling it fundamentally unfair, and pointed to the 5 people sentenced to death in the state that had later been exonerated. I said African Americans, but that's wrong. It's people of color, meaning in half. And the exoneration thing should freak people out. You get caught. Now, you getting caught, the state has to make a case. The reason that the state has to make a case is because you need to make sure that the person who got caught was right. But what if that person doesn't have the legal resources necessary to run a decent case? What if there are things in the case that a better lawyer would have caught, but because of his economic status, couldn't get that better lawyer and ended up with kind of a strip mall lawyer with his life at stake? I guess the point I'm making here is there are other factors that go into a trial as opposed to the trial itself. The trial is given somewhat of a determination, but you have to look into the trial itself to figure out whether the determination was accurate. Because just because a trial or a verdict was given doesn't necessarily mean that in the real world, in the reality of things, that it was right. That it was right. It is a massive injustice for any innocent person to go to prison. It is that much more so worse when that person is put on death row for something he didn't commit. Understand, it's this perspective of you from the outside world. Even though you know you didn't do it, it doesn't really matter. Everybody's looking at you with a particular glare. Oh, that guy's a killer. That guy did this, that guy did that, and that guy's going to be killed for those crimes. And you're going to have some people salivating over the fact that you're going to be killed for that crime because they think you're guilty. That is a horrendous case for somebody to be in. It is bad that a person is in prison, but you can rectify to some degree and let that person out. Even if 20 years has passed, you can let that person out. Under death row, there is no going back. You better be completely accurate, or otherwise you've just put an innocent person to death. That should give anybody pause. So I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And good job, Newsom. The next point to this is the drivers of crime and dealing with the actual root drivers of crime. Why are your prisons overcrowded? Can you do something about the fact that your prisons are overcrowded? I guess I'm making the point that being tough on crime is one thing, but being tough on crime is not necessarily the thing that stops crime. I'll end it here. Thanks all.